Good evening, Canterbury School. My name is Fernando Bermudez. Thank you, Headmaster Thomas Sheehy and his wife Betsy Sheehy. Director of Communications, Mark Van Ness. The Academic Dean, Lou Mandling, and Guy Simonelli, for arranging this talk after the good fortune of meeting Adriano Echeverra and his brother Felix. Most importantly, I thank God for my defense team, family, friends, and supporters who helped me survive over 18 years in New York State maximum security prisons as an innocent man. Which brings me to Canterbury in its 98th year of existence as this year's Faye Vincent speaker. En route to Canterbury, the 14th century English writer Geoffrey Chaucer came to mind. Known as the father of English literature, Chaucer's Canterbury Tales is a collection of 24 stories told by fictional pilgrims while traveling to the Cathedral of St. Thomas Becket in Canterbury, England. The prologue begins with a promise for a free meal if a good tale is told. Well, since I've eaten at your beautiful dining hall beforehand, I owe you a tale. My story, however, is no comic masterpiece, as Chaucer succeeded in telling. Rather, it's more like a saga, as Mr. Van Ness put it, whose cold reality slapped me one summer evening. On August 6, 1991, detectives arrested me in front of my parents' home, which I shared with my 4 younger siblings in Washington Heights, New York, Upper Manhattan. As my mother screamed, detectives removed their guns from my head, squeezing me into a squad car. One burly detective elbowed me and said, "Sorry to interrupt your night," while another, quite curtly, in a Bostonian accent, remarked, "Let's move this car. We got business." Our caravan sped off. I arrived to the 6th Precinct in Lower Manhattan. I didn't know why I was being arrested. Hours into my interrogation, I was told that I was charged with murder. And I couldn't believe it, as I told the police and prosecutor who arrived that I had nothing to do with any violence whatsoever. I told the detective and prosecutor that on August 3rd and 4th, which was the night in question that they were concerned about, I was about to enroll in the medical profession, having just taken my placement test. It was, in fact, the happiest day of my life. I sought to make my parents proud, I told them. In fact, it was my last hurrah, as it were, as I drove with my friends to different places in the city, absorbing that summer evening, the kaleidoscope of culture, of Times Square, of crowded nightclubs. But under no circumstances, I emphasized, was I involved in a shooting, which I would later learn amid my over 10-hour interrogation involved a situation in which a 16-year-old individual had been punched. The 16-year-old sought retaliation and told his neighborhood friends from the West 90s neighborhood who had punched him. Outside of the nightclub, on August 4th by now, on the morning therein, this individual, this 16-year-old, told the group of individuals who were following him who punched him. And out of a melee that began on the corner near the club, someone emerged out of that crowd of an estimated 30 to 60 Latinos attacking an estimated 20 to 30 blacks and shot Raymond Blount dead. Raymond Blount was taken to the hospital by 3 friends, his 3 best friends, who came from his Queens neighborhood, dead. Police descended on the area, scooped up some teenage witnesses, brought them to the precinct, and began interrogating them. These witnesses, under chaotic situations conducive to a bad identification procedure, had been physically attacked in the melee, had been stabbed, had been punched, thrown bottles at, and their escape had been blocked by a Jeep. At the precinct, they were then, hungry, tired, and traumatized, brought to another precinct where they began identifying pictures in an unsupervised room where detectives would later admit they were allowed to freely discuss photographs that were on file. One teenage girl, 17-year-old young lady, picked my picture and said that I resembled the perpetrator after having picked 2 individuals who she said resembled the perpetrator. And she shared my picture illegally with the other witnesses, which contaminated the identification procedure. Mind you, by now, the shooter of Raymond Blount had been tentatively identified as someone else. But 3 friends of the deceased had picked the person who was responsible, the 16-year-old. But they said, this man, Fernando Bermudez, is not him who shot our best friend. That was because shortly thereafter, I was made to sit in a lineup rather than stand up because I stood 6'2" and weighed 220 pounds versus the description by all the witnesses of the perpetrator standing 5'10", weighing 165 pounds. I knew something was wrong as I was told to stay sitting. And the police detectives in their plain clothes elbowed and joked around with each other, as I was the only person there who was not a police officer. I repeatedly told the police and prosecutor that I had no involvement with this. 3 friends of mine who were with me on the night in question came to the police precinct and confirmed my alibi. But I wasn't believed. Because I was misidentified by this 17-year-old young lady in a contaminated identification procedure, and because I refused to plead guilty to something that I didn't do, I was sent to the Manhattan Tombs in Lower Manhattan, where I was placed in a crowded, smelly bullpen that reeked of urine, vomit, and defecation. From the Tombs, I was sent to Rikers Island. Rikers Island, as I feared, was a living hell. I found myself suddenly surrounded by 14,000 inmates and a big, large-scale riot which was still simmering from the year before. People at Rikers Island were fighting over the telephones, cutting and stabbing each other, vying for control of black market operations. And I just prayed that I could get out of there, as I was stuck in a dorm while my case slowly made its way to trial. I slept with one eye open and one eye closed, because in a dorm, I had to watch my back, because anything could happen. I believed that as an American citizen, who had pledged allegiance to the flag of the United States of America in elementary and high school, that the truth would prevail. And it was with this faith that I went forward and exercised my rights to a trial, to confront my accusers. I didn't know about the illegal identification procedure. I did not know that the 16-year-old witness had in fact, ladies and gentlemen, told the police and prosecutor who the real perpetrator was. And that the police and prosecutor, until the trial, had not investigated. That is to say that they acknowledged in open trial that they did not investigate my case. So here it is, this 16-year-old witness lying and saying that I'm someone else, someone that I'm totally not, despite the police and prosecutor knowing my characteristics and whereabouts as totally different than from what their star witness, who cut a deal in order to escape prosecution, had told them. Moreover, some of the witnesses had criminal records which had been dismissed on the eve of my trial in exchange for their own criminal background, unrelated to this case, getting dismissed. I testified on my behalf, as did my character and alibi witnesses, and 3 friends of the deceased who said, this man did not shoot our best friend. But because of the entrenched lies in my case, I was found guilty. A jury in February 1992 declared me guilty, to the gasp of my mother. And I believed that the truth would nevertheless prevail, because as a result of these key leads emerging from the trial, key leads which the prosecutor had suppressed and not turned over in time for my lawyer to make use of an investigation before trial began, I believed that my sentencing would be postponed. That is because a private detective, former homicide detective, had begun working pro bono on my case, and he went into the West 90s neighborhood, and he started finding out evidence of my innocence. He started finding out that the State Star witness had lied. In fact, the State Star witness admitted that he lied by now. And so I thought that my sentencing would be prevented. But unfortunately, the judge, Justice John Bradley, refused to prolong my sentencing. And a resounding pound of the gavel, he sentenced me to 23 years to life in New York State maximum security prisons. And all I remember was my mother's horrified face, as if she had seen the face of Medusa herself, frozen in terror. And my father yelling at the prosecutor that the truth would prevail. My brothers and sisters crying on the floor in an eerie stadium wave of grief. I almost fell, but handcuffs lifted me up quite quickly and took me from Rikers Island to my first maximum security prison. From Downstate Correctional Facility, I ended up at a classification center. My civilian clothes were now stripped. I was given state green issued clothing. My number became 928325. I was spread with lice spray and liquid and doused with water so cold that it felt like an ice pitcher of water had been poured over my head. I sought to maintain my composure, believing that the truth would prevail. But my next stop was Elmira Correctional Facility in upstate Chemung County, my first real maximum security prison, where trouble from Rikers Island and the over 2,500 stabbings and assaults, violent assaults that had occurred there, were now, for revenge, carried over into New York State maximum security prisons. When I arrived, shackled, manacled, with a bunch of men, the place had an industrial revolution feel to it as machines cranked metal and spewed sparks and smoke. But that wasn't the only loud noise that was disturbing. Men were screaming. There was hysterical laughter from people who were deranged because they couldn't get their medication on time to handle their mental imbalances. People were defecating right next to me. Fights were breaking out in the dining hall. The noise was so unbearable that for the first time in my life, I considered killing myself. I was catching delusions in this 6 by 9 foot cell, an imaginary noose beckoning to me to end my misery, what Ernest Hemingway called the big way out. But because my family loved me, because I needed to prove something, I said no. And I'm glad I did, because as I was shackled from that prison and brought to my next maximum security prison, I saw, right before I left, another young man being carried out who did kill himself. And I was so glad that I didn't do that, because what impact would it have on my parents and everyone else who cared? Instead, what I started doing was writing. I started writing for an attorney because by now I had no more money for an attorney. My father had gone on a quest, and he found an attorney through a judge who recommended an attorney who had just graduated as an attorney. She was a babe at age 50, soaking wet at 100 pounds, possessing the voice of a teeny bopper and the energy of a hummingbird. Yet she had the courage of a Joan of Arc, as she sought to reveal the holy grail of truth in this case. Leaving her Westchester estate, she trampled the housing projects of the Lower East Side, Upper Manhattan, Queens. And what she found was a bunch of teenage witnesses who were yearning to tell the truth, whose conscience was not letting them sleep. And these witnesses revealed the reasons why they were threatened, coerced, or pressured into purposely identifying me. Armed with this evidence, we entered the courtroom of Judge Bradley once again. But he laughed at her, refusing to test the evidence. And this would happen time and time again. I started growing very despondent at losing so many appeals. I was a pilgrim in this new land, now trying to make my way to freedom. And I sought to survive in certain ways. As Shakespeare in As You Like It put it, great is the use of adversity, which, like a toad, ugly and venomous, yet wears a crown on its head. What I started doing was, while learning the law, teaching myself the rudiments of Latin, I established, you could say, my own copperly library in my cell. I had so many books, but the reality of me using my hunt and peck method in my typewriter to write legal letters for anyone to help me beyond Marianne DeBarry, this attorney who had taken my case pro bono, was often disturbed through a cell search. In my cell, with close eccentricity, I would arrange my cell with a level of feng shui, the Japanese art of harmonious arrangement of living conditions. But when officers descended in my cell, they would leave it looking like a tornado had ransacked it. And I would grow very depressed as I laid in that 6 by 9 foot cell. So depressed that by the late 90s, I spoke to Marianne DeBarry by phone as she consoled me. But the problem was that she was becoming a dream merchant, it seemed, who was peddling hope and for which I had no more currency. I looked up at the sky one snowy evening, questioning my very existence as to how I lost another appeal in the late 90s. And I felt like giving up on God. I was in prison for a crime I didn't commit, having been physically assaulted. When I saw my family after prison visits, the joy that I shared with them was quickly replaced with the cold reality of being strip searched and having to show my butt to a correctional officer. This humiliation was weighing heavily on me. But as I spoke to her, and she just babbled on about God and everything, and I just was like incoherent about it because I was so depressed, something happened. A snowflake dropped on my shoulder in that cold prison yard. And then another. And I looked at the snowflake. Each one was unique. Each one was different. Certainly, there had to be an architect of this universe that was beyond my comprehension, and therefore a reason to the very existence as to that I was living in prison. I looked up at the sky, that dark, inky sky, and I saw a mini campfire burning, a star. And I said, God, help me get out of prison. Help me get out of prison because I'm innocent. I didn't do this. Help me, please. And by 2000, he gave me the strength to continue going, to continue writing letters in a computer program where I cranked out letter after letter, hunched over that computer. And people started answering my cries. I obtained a new team of attorneys. Unfortunately, at first, one attorney wanted $15,000 in order for my case to proceed. Because now the next arena was federal court, where I start to attack the constitutionality of my conviction. How could I pay this attorney? My parents, now spent, exhausted from years of stress, along with my wife and children, took a loan, but they couldn't complete the $15,000. I got the idea as a way to support my family that if I sold clothes in prison, I could help pay for this attorney. I had already saved some money by practically starving myself and working in the mess hall, where I swept floors, cleaned dirty food grates, cleaned Titanic kettles for a meager pay of 38 cents an hour, working overtime for this meager salary, telling an officer with a wink, please let me get some food so I could take out, so that therefore I couldn't spend my own money at the prison commissary, money which I saved. So what I did was, I bought clothes wholesale, and I started retailing them in prison. Suddenly, I'm the prison haberdasher, selling sweatpants, socks, underwears, t-shirts, sweat hoods, dress shirts, which I bought as low as $5 and retailed for up to $15 to $20. But I didn't receive physical cash. What I received was stamps and cigarettes, commissary items, such as Tide detergent, cosmetics, toothpaste, which I sent to my wife to help her in the near homelessness that she at times was facing while dealing with the poverty of our situation. But it helped pay my lawyer, so much so that at one point I sent my lawyer several thousand stamps, which she accepted as final payment. We entered federal court in 2002. My efforts were paying off. I'm back in court. And this federal judge, unlike the previous state court judge, has now requested that all the witnesses come forward to federal court. The witnesses, one by one, stated the reasons why they lied. This is a dawning of the new day. I'm going home, I thought. As I left, for the first time, a cell which I was forced to be in with another man. A cell where this man was so delusional that you could see his silhouette, his tongue sticking out in the middle of the night, with the glimmer of light that shone through our cell bars. And so when I arrived, I patiently waited, believing that the truth would prevail. A book came out about my case, published by NYU Press. We sent it to the federal judge. Here, look at this. Let that nod you in the right direction. But by 2004, I was denied in federal court. And I was devastated. So devastated that I needed to see a psychologist. I continued fighting. Despite my faith wavering, I joined the choir and I sang praises to God, believing that faith, as Martin Luther King says, is that dark staircase for which when you can't see the next step, you take it anyway. And I went against what I was seeing and thought about the faith and substance of the evidence not seen. Despite losing another appeal on my federal level, I didn't give up. I continued fighting and I continued writing. All the attorneys had failed, but I found a new team of attorneys as a result of continuous diligence in writing. I had an attorney who had the idea that if we used the favorable part of the federal judge's decision, which was in my favor, but failed to overturn the complete conviction, then we can go back to federal court and begin a process. I said, after 10 appeals, how are we going to do this? She said, well, I can't do it alone. I will get you a team of attorneys who can. She got me her law professor husband from Seton Hall Law School. She got me an attorney, Barry Pollock, from Washington, D.C., and his law firm. She got me a former U.S. attorney and chief prosecutor for the Southern District Courts of the United States, Alan Kaufman, to join my team from the law firm of Kelly Dry. In addition to the Innocence Project in New York, Davis and Polk, Centurion Ministries in Princeton, New Jersey. And together, we entered court, believing that this angle would work. Now, by 2006, my case was already receiving national attention. Court TV had aired my story. Rallies were happening downtown in Lower Manhattan with Free Fernando signs in freezing temperatures. The New York Times covered my case, front page. MSNBC ran a national story. This, unbeknownst to myself or any of my defense team, caused a certain nervousness in the district attorney's office. They had, in fact, began doing what they should have done in 1991. That is to say, they began conducting an investigation. What they were trying to do, however, was incriminate me with the key leads that their star witness had told them. But those key leads, in us having already proved that he was lying, upon their investigation, proved my innocence even further. But we didn't know any of this because they hid this evidence. So the judge, now a new judge, Justice John Cataldo, prevented the district attorney's office from conducting any more so-called investigations. Too little, too late, he said. And in 2008 and 2009, my case proceeded full force into the New York State Manhattan Supreme Court before this new judge. And in the proceedings, it was revealed that the district attorney's office had conducted an investigation. When the judge learned this, he was incensed. Incensed so much because also the district attorney's office had admitted for the first time in any state court proceedings that their star witness had committed perjury. He had lied under oath, they admitted. Moreover, during this time of nervousness for the other side, as it were, I was given a decision to make. This decision revolved around me being offered a plea bargain in which if I pled guilty to manslaughter instead of the second-degree homicide charge, the charges would be dismissed, I would be able to go home, and the case would be resolved. But I said no. I refused to lie to my children. I refused, after 18 years, to let them get the victory. And so I rejected that offer, that Faustian bargain, that deal with the devil, I considered it. I wasn't going to sell my soul for nothing because I believed in the truth. And so I went forward with the proceedings. And the proceedings were favorable for me at every turn. At the 11th hour, after losing 10 appeals, 11 witnesses came forward, cross-country, and supported my truth. And the judge, upon me being sent back to Rikers Island and heading back into that courtroom shackled, hushed the courtroom in total silence. The rapt attention and hushed suffocation palpable. And he declared me actually innocent in that courtroom as reporters furiously scribbled and cameras swirled. I couldn't believe what was happening. I had intended to go in and speak as if I was perhaps George Washington crossing the Delaware and, Your Honor, this time we have finally reached this. I couldn't do none of that because I sank into the bosom of my attorney and cried like a baby. I cried because I was free. I cried because the humiliation would now end. I cried because now I could go be a father to my children who always asked, Daddy, when are you coming home? And he chastised the prosecution, this judge, Justice John Cataldo, in a noble, courageous effort, saying, 1, the prosecutor knew and should have known that they were relying on perjured testimony. 2, that for the first time, the state has admitted that it has been relying on perjured testimony. 3, that my identification procedures were horrible, as the federal judge had said, and should not have occurred. All wrapped up in an actual innocence claim, which made New York State legal history because it received the same recognition as a DNA-based exoneration, even though I had no DNA exonerating me. Such was the overwhelming evidence in my favor. Outside the courtroom, there was a jubilee. My family, friends, the crush of reporters were all wearing Free Fernando Bermudez shirts. My mother was crying, I'm so happy, I'm so happy. My wife was being interviewed by Channel 7, and she says, thank God there's a Jesus. My father followed Dick Brennan from Fox 5. See, I told you, you had it good all along. You kept investigating, and that's what you had to do all along. I was shortly released into the loving arms of my family, to a brave new world, as it were, beyond Aldous Huxley. A world which had transformed so much throughout my 18 years of incarceration. Throughout the years in which I ran to exhaustion in that prison yard just so I could sleep at night, doing push-ups in my cell so I could alleviate the anxiety. A world which had changed now, which had grown smaller. There was no internet when I went to prison in 1991. The cell phones were this big. Now they were this small. And when I first got out on the prison grounds, they gave it to me and I held it upside down. And it felt so delicate. Fashion had changed. Upon my release, I was given what's called skinny jeans. Skinny jeans? I'm not really skinny. They said, no, that's the style, dude. So when I try to put it on, like hopping, they weren't really coming up, and they said, yo, that's the style. I said, no, it's not. They look like leotards. So I had to shelve that idea. And so I came home and I had to get used to the culture shock of my life. The culture shock, as sociologists would say, to the adaptation of a new climate. I had to acclimate myself to a new world. And I didn't realize that in night draft bags of countless books that I took with me, out of the much property that I left in prison, I carried with me something else. And that was post-traumatic stress disorder. I didn't think that it would invade my life. But I realized that I couldn't forget what I saw. Men being stabbed with sewing machine efficiency and speed. Police, correctional officers attacking other inmates to the point where they looked like the Elephant Man. I couldn't forget that. It came in my dreams. I would wake up in the middle of the night still thinking as if I was an inmate still being counted in prison. Bermudez, on the count, on the count. I found myself in my son's room, a room like my cell, small and cramped, at times preferring that room, until my wife would say, Fernando, get out that room, you're not in a prison cell anymore. I found myself having heart palpitations. I found myself having difficulty even crossing the street, making choices in department stores as the colors dazzled me with so many choices and selections. I started seeing a psychologist who diagnosed me with this condition. I continue seeking therapy. I've been able to continue with my life, and I'm dealing with the responsibilities of being a father to 3 children and a husband to my wife. My 3 children, my eldest daughter no longer living with us, now leaves me with the responsibility of my immediate 2 children. My daughter Carissa is aged 10. And as her show says, in The Wizard of Waverly Place, everything in life is not what it seems. And in adjusting, I realized that her constant demands to me required an extra effort of energy. It required listening to Selena Gomez while we're in the car instead of what I like to listen to. But I do love her like a love song, baby. I do. And I love taking her taekwondo, where she's a red belt today, and where she speaks about, Daddy, I'm going to do public speaking just like you. I want to go to Canterbury. I said, well, good. Keep studying. Keep doing good. I want to go to Yale, Princeton, Brown, Dartmouth. I don't know. We'll see when we get there. Okay, well, keep studying. Continue with that Kindle, which she keeps buying books that I can't afford. Now, my son, on the other hand, 6-year-old Fernando Bermudez III, is something else. Well, my son, okay, he's come over the process of yelling, "You're stupid," or "I hate you," when he can't get his way. He's overcome that. Getting mad when I chased him for putting stickers all over the house, those stickers that you get in the dentist's office, and running out in his underwears. He's overcome that. And he no longer gets as mad when I call him whiny hiney. But when I take him to Walmart and other department stores, he still acts the fool. He takes his cart still, and he wants to navigate. You know, he wants to be Prince Henry the Navigator. And he takes this cart, and he, if you're not careful, will knock you down. So I'm trying to adjust my son now and trying to help him with his temperament, because he'll scream the littlest thing out of order, he'll get out of control with. Consider the Transformers, those little toys which you can transform to a car or the robot type of thing. Well, I don't know how to put those things together. And for Christmas, he gets like 10 of them. So go figure, this is beyond the Rubik's Cube for me. But he's doing better. But just watch out for him at your local department store. I continue striving for academic excellence, as I did in prison. In prison, what kept me alive, what gave me hope, was embracing education. I sought to educate myself by just learning rudimentary vocabulary words after reading the biography of Malcolm X, which inspired me to be self-taught. I wrote for the prison newspaper. I taught Latin American history. I tried to become a role model in prison to help others understand that there is another way to living a life of violence, depression, hopelessness, and just mere idleness. Today, I have successfully completed my bachelor's degree upon my release. Straight A's. Set to graduate summa cum laude. I've been invited by federal judges to speak in their courthouses. I used to be a defendant. Now I'm a spokesperson before federal judges. God is good. It is through God's power and might that He has put me in this position as a voice for the innocent, as a voice for people who are oppressed. I believe that it is important for all of us to be aware that there are two sides to this life that we live. As I fight for criminal justice reform, I want you to all know that you all come from a place of privilege in Canterbury. But there is another world out there. And I urge you to be your own best friend. Be good to yourself. Don't put yourself down. Say yes, you can make it, when the voice of negativity says no. Because you're going to need to be your best friend in what could be the cold realities of life. Geoffrey Chaucer, in his Canterbury Tales, was able, with masterful strokes in English, able to connect the diversity of a people existing in England at that time. I'm talking about the French from Normandy, and the English and the Latin languages that were dominating from the Teutonic origins that English became. But what he did was he united all those people with their diversity into one voice. And that one voice became the reflection of a common humanity. Today, as I see the kaleidoscope of culture here, please know that the diversity that we all share is our strength. The privilege that you have in the respective positions that you will obtain from Canterbury and henceforth will allow you to go forward as missionaries, and be able to touch lives and inspire them, because now you have heard a story of someone who had to endure something from the very bowels of depression and hopelessness to the height of faith and strength. It is my hope to encourage you all to never give up with whatever adversity strikes your lives. And you too will be able to make a great occasion of this experience at Canterbury. Regrettably, Adriano Echeverra and his brother Felix cannot be here today, but I am indebted to them for how our lives converged and brought us to this single location today. As a people, as human beings, as individuals who strive for academic excellence. It is my hope that God blesses you with peace, prosperity, and much health, now and for all your continuing formative years. Thank you.